Good morning. Good morning. It is 9 a.m. So it must be Make It Happen Monday. So welcome those of you new to the show. This show is all about supporting you to achieve success without stress by sharing stories, strategies, and also I want to sort of talk about the skills you might need in order to achieve the thing that you want to achieve. So without any further ado, today's subject is all about confidence with planning. Those that have been watching this series is all about confidence. The first episode was much more about confidence, where it comes from, what works and what doesn't. One of the things I know that people can lose confidence in specifically is decision making, planning, and time management. So last week we talked about confident decision making. Today we're talking about planning, and next week we'll be talking about time. So without any further ado, let's just check, what is planning? Well, the dictionary definition is that is a process of making a plan. And when I look at the definition of what a plan is, it's a detailed proposal for doing or achieving something. It's an intention or a decision about what one is going to do, a detailed map or diagram. So with that in mind, over the years of coaching people, my experience is if I ask them what they'd like to have happen and I asked them some questions so they got clarity of what they meant by what they said, when they had confidence in themselves and the process, the action that needed to be taken to get them from where they are now to where they want to be. So let's say, for example, they decide they want to be fitter. If they knew that to get fit, they had to do 5 sit-ups a day, 5 star jumps, 5 press-ups, walk for 20 minutes, go up and down the stairs 20 times, then they would have a plan. They'd know the series of actions that would need to be taken. But the process of planning would be about actually working out when you're going to do it, but also thinking about what kind of resource or support you might need. So it might be that normally the time when you cook the dinner, you need to go for your walk. So you'll need your partner to cook dinner that day. It might be, if you're talking about stuff in the workplace, if you want to be more assertive or you want to do more sales calls, then it might be that you need a quiet office where you feel that you can talk freely. Whatever those things are. So the planning process is a process of going, really thinking about what needs to happen, what happens between where you are now and where you want to be. So I want to talk first of all about what works about planning. Is that for those people who love planning, it gives them an opportunity to really unpick and unpack all the components. And one of the things that comes up in this is the detailed planning, is that you can get into the detail of what needs to happen for the thing that you want to have happen. And I know that later today I'm working with Karen Williams and we're doing the 5-day book idea challenge. And what I know when it comes to planning things like a book or your success in business or a healthy lifestyle or better relationships is there's often little bits of the process that we did on autopilot the last time we did it. And then we forget that that's an important part. So in the case of the authors, quite often people set aside time to write, but they don't set the time aside to include either prior to that writing time or at the start of that writing time to actually think about what would they like to write about, or where do they need to get the information from, or what research do you need to do. And so what happens is we put a chunk of time in the diary. We might block out the diary, as I have this week, for writing time or website updates or sales calls. But let's say you sat down to do the sales call, then you may sit there and then realize you haven't got all of the telephone numbers that you need or the contact details, or you might discover there are a few people there that you feel a bit uncomfortable about calling and you haven't thought about what do you need to do. So the process of planning, good morning, whoever's just joined me, please do say hello. The process of planning is, in my definition of it, is time and space for you to preempt and anticipate everything that might be required in order for you to achieve the outcome that you want to achieve. And when you have a plan, I realize now that I can think about something I'd like to have happen. And I used to hear myself say things, oh, I've got a plan. And what that meant for me was I was really clear what I was going to do. And probably because I'd done it before and I had confidence in the process, I would feel like I have a plan because I know I can get on and do it. However, sometimes we say those things, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, we forget what it was that was involved last time. Maybe we've done it so many times, we've forgotten all the details of the process, and we miss out bits of it. So taking time to plan things out means you stop and really think about, what are the components? What are the series of actions that I need to take in order to make this thing, whatever that thing is? As I say, it can be whatever outcome you want, make it possible. So what works about planning is it enables us to preempt where things might go wrong. So for example, but it also helps us to remind our system of what has to happen in order for that to happen well. And what can happen is that, planning for me, when I take the time to plan things out, what I often do is improve my own process. So if I put, well, last time I did this, and I think, actually, I've learned something new, there's a more efficient or an effective way of doing that. Or maybe last time I did it, I had to do it myself, but I've met somebody since then who knows how to do it. And actually they can do it faster and quicker and actually be more effective if I outsource that. Or maybe I did it last time, but since I've done it last time, I've realized that I want to train somebody to do that well, or I want to, maybe I want to delegate and get my children or my husband to contribute more and do those parts around the house, whatever that thing might be. So the process of planning can often be a place for you to really build confidence in yourself and the process. It's a great way of updating and improving your process to make sure that you are working at your very best and it's the most efficient process that you're going to take, the series of actions. But equally, it can help you to highlight any glitches. Maybe if there are old patterns of behavior where you might write it out and you say, I'm going to do that. But even when you say you're going to do it, you often avoid it or sideline it. And actually in the planning stage, you can start taking action right then in order to set yourself up for success. So that's what works about planning. What doesn't work about planning, and I've heard people say this time and time again, is that they spend a lot of time doing the planning and they might have a meticulously detailed plan of everything's going to that needs to happen. But one or two things happens. Either they do everything that's on the list, they take action and they do it, but they don't get the result. So let's say, for example, you have this great plan that you want to make an extra 2,000 or 5,000, 10,000 income in your business. And so you know that you've got to attend these events, you've got to get these leads, you've got to do these follow-up calls, and you take all of that action and you do all of the following up calls, and then you don't get the result. What can happen then is you lose confidence in planning and you feel like planning was a waste of time. But I would like to invite you to notice what's changed and being curious about, was the planning that you did, was there what worked about the planning, what didn't work about the planning? And in my experience of working with people where we're training them to listen to what they're saying, but also to listen to what they're thinking and noticing if they're the same or different, is that sometimes when we're doing something that's quite familiar, we just write the tasks out, but we don't notice how we feel or what we're thinking or what we're believing. And so quite often, the bit that was missing in the plan was actually an awareness that there was, concerns about the time or the cost, or your confidence and your skills and ability to do it. And so quite often the reason it hasn't worked isn't because the actual the skill of and the task of planning isn't effective. It's because we weren't really listening to ourselves. So those of you see me on social media, at the weekend or last week, I think it was Thursday, my charger for my laptop completely died. I was having to revert to an old laptop that's been in the cupboard for about 3 years. I was having to desperately update all the software, Zoom and various other things before I could use them. And I didn't have a license for Microsoft, so I couldn't use my Outlook and I couldn't use Word or Excel, etc. So I was very limited what I could do. But I knew that I had to get a new lead. I'd been wiggling and jiggling it and trying to get it to work, and it's been very temperamental for a few months now. But what I was ignoring was the fact that I was on this quest to be more profitable this year, to be more financially successful. And so part of that is not spending without, consciously thinking about it. So what had happened in my plan is I was I just heard don't spend, but actually I hadn't looked at the consequences of not spending and what it would cost me in times, energy and effort. I didn't even look at how much time I was spending wiggling and jiggling my laptop lead in order to make the thing work. So if I had actually planned to get a new lead and thought about when am I going to get one, and consciously thought about, if I do just wait till it absolutely dies, so therefore I've put off spending the money for it, what's that going to cost me? And I didn't do that bit. So one of the things that doesn't happen with planning is that we don't listen to that little voice that's got some other information, and we just kind of do it at surface level, and we just don't really get into how we feel about it. We're not listening to any lack of confidence or worries or concerns or beliefs like, don't spend any money. And the irony of it is, when it came to buying a new lead, the new one was £17, but somewhere in my mind, I'd made up it would be 50, 60, 70. And so I had also had some kind of rule about not spending that much. So that was just interesting to notice for myself. One of the other things that doesn't work about planning is that, generally speaking, as humans, there are people who are, neurodiversity, they're hardwired, if you like, their brain is really good at doing the big picture. So I'm very fortunate in that I'm able to do the big picture, although I'm much better at doing that with and for other people than I am for myself. So I'm great at doing big picture if other people tell me what they want, and I can sort of visualize how that might work over time. And some people are very sensory and they're very in the moment. So if I were to say to you, what would you like to have happen? Big picture people would describe what they want. And I remember one client I worked with a few years back now, he gave me his outcome. The thing that he was describing was actually describing a plan, a vision and an outcome for like 100 years. So it was like beyond his lifetime. Whereas if I asked my husband what he'd like to happen, he would probably tell me like his natural profile would be like a few hours from now. So one thing that doesn't work about our planning is that if we are naturally very big picture people, when we do plans, we tend to do sort of the big milestones, the big turning points. If we're very detailed, we could get really bogged down in the detail. And actually, when we plan at our best, one of the things that it can help us to do is to actually, by using questions, we can start to help drill down into the detail. We're more big picture. But if we're very detailed, it can help us to expand and look at the impact and the consequences over time. So one of the things that also can affect our ability to plan, so either our time profiles are we're a big picture or we're detail, and we can't, the plan that we need to do is the opposite to the way we're naturally hardwired to do. Second thing that can affect and interrupt planning is stress and trauma. So when we are really stressed and we are talking about what's going wrong and everything's, we haven't got enough time and, it's really difficult, and those are the kinds of conversations we're having with ourselves. Then when we are stressed or something shocks us or upsets us, then our brain is hardwired to kind of shut the profiles down of time. We're not really looking into the future. We're not looking into the past. We're just trying to survive today. So when we make decisions, we are not really reflecting on what worked or what didn't work. We're just trying to avoid the thing that didn't work. When we can't project into the future to think about what could be different, it's just anticipating all the things that could go wrong, in which case we're making very, very short-term, very in-the-moment decisions, because that's all our brain can cope with. So one of the things that doesn't work about planning is doing it when you're stressed, because often you're going to be doing what I would call survival decision making, and that is often required, but you're not going to make decisions that are going to help you thrive. And if you're going to more likely to go to your default decision making, but you're also more likely to repeat patterns of behavior that doesn't work for you. Another thing that doesn't work about planning is our memory. So we all have a different ways of memory recall, and we all use our 5 senses differently. And so I'm sure you only have to talk to your friends. Some friends can remember the minute details of their childhood. And then other of us can't even remember what we did this weekend. You get to Monday and someone says, do you have a lovely weekend? You're like, I have no idea what I did. Can't remember. So when it comes to planning, when we are wanting to look at what are the series of actions, it often depends on our ability to remember what we did last time, what worked for us last time, what didn't work for us, what could have worked better. So if you haven't got the memory recall, then planning becomes difficult. So 3 things that, just to recap then, that don't always work about planning is that our own natural profiles, if we're big picture or detailed, we may need the plan that's opposite to our natural profile. If we're trying to plan when we're stressed or we're suffering some shock or trauma, then we're more likely to do sort of just survival, get us out of this pickle feeling kind of planning, and we can't do longer term planning. And if we don't have the memory recall, we can't remember what worked from before, which sometimes is because we're stressed and sometimes it's just because of our own neurodiversity. Then when we make a plan, we're not making it informed by what it is that we're doing. So I want to talk about 3 things then that can help it work better. The first thing is to be facilitated. When you're coached or you're being asked questions from a coach, there's a couple of things that are happening. Is that if you are stressed or there's trauma or anything else going on, the fact that you are not on your own, whether you're being coached one-to-one or you're being coached in a group, means that that part of your brain that feels isolated and afraid and scared, often it's enough to settle that part of the brain that says, oh, I'm not on my own. This is normal. I'm okay. It's not just me. And that can be enough to settle those stress chemicals in your brain. The second thing is that when you work with a facilitator, or you can facilitate yourself doing this, is to remember space matters. So thinking about memory recall and thinking about your perceptions of time, whether you're a detail or a big picture, what often we're not taught at school is that we as human beings hold information inside us and around us. So if you are wanting to recall information from the past, and you want to, remember something like that, one of the questions I use as a clean facilitator using a process called Clean Space is I might ask my client, so find a space that knows something else about when you did that last. And so they might physically get up and move to there. Sometimes if you've got limited space, even just moving, so you go 10 degrees this way or 10 degrees that way, and actually you're just moving around on your chair, because you get a new perspective, you're physically moving, you get a different perspective. And I'm seeing this right now a lot since the pandemic. People's spatial awareness, and because they're looking at a screen, their perception of space there is shorter. And so if you've locked yourself away, I mean, at the moment, for example, I've got my curtains drawn, I've got a studio light on, so the lighting is good for filming. But what that also means is that I don't really get to see outside. So I'm having to remember when I'm not filming to pull the screen back. But if I've got a day of coaching and I've got 3 or 4 sessions in a day, then I can spend most of that day, and the furthest my eye gets to look is at the distance from me to my screen. And so we physically moving ourselves into different spaces, driving to be up a hill or being by the coast where you've got horizons. All of those things, when you move yourself physically through space, it gives you a different perspective, and it helps your memory and your brain to access the information, the wisdom that you have. So if we're doing a retreat here, I'll say to someone, do you want to find a space? And they might go into the living room or the kitchen. They might go in the garden. We've got the camper van often open at the front. They might go upstairs. They might sit on the stairs to just get a higher perspective. And learning to recognize that what can work for you to access different time frames and different perspectives is by physically moving. I see people, if you hear yourself saying things like, I feel really stuck, then it's a really good opportunity would be either to have a coach or a facilitator, because it can make us feel unstuck just because we've got somebody else holding that space and helping us untangle the thoughts and the feelings and sensations that we're experiencing. But also when you go through different spaces, you can witness different information. And the third thing is to bear in mind that when it comes to memory recall, I know for me, when I'm writing my books, I've realized now that I don't have the memory recall to go back and collect the information. Some people could just write a book because they'll just remember everything. Whereas I almost have to relive it. So I have to, the next time I'm running the Do Delegate or Ditch course, I listen back to the recordings and I track it as I go, because I don't have that memory recall to do the planning. So what I know that it often happens is, and can be helpful, and why people have coaches, is that somebody else can help you track how you do you and the order you do things, which means when you make a plan, they can help you to remember what worked for you, what doesn't work for you. And I said there was going to be 3, but I do want to leave you with a 4th one, because I just want to mention this before I log off today, is the other thing with, the questions you ask yourself to help you extract the information, your perspectives, where you're looking, where you're physically positioning yourself to actually think about a particular time frame or what you'd like to have happen. And remembering, you've got to find ways to track what works for you. And that's why sometimes having a coach can help you to track that information. But also when we talk about memory recall, we can talk and somebody else might remember. They might hear what we've said and we're not really listening to what we're saying, and they'll remember what we've said when we don't. So that's one thing. If we change positions, we might well remember, that thing when you go to a room to get something, then you forget why you went there. So you come back and then you remember why you're there. That's all of that is an example of, if you change spaces, sometimes the memory, the thing you're trying to remember, you'll find the information in a different space. But the other thing is that if I was observing you, the likelihood is that you will look to a certain position, eye movement. And something I've been talking to some different practitioners about recently is that because we're on screens a lot more nowadays, we are more likely to keep quite a straight eye movement. Whereas actually when we remember things, we're like, you go like this and we do this and like that. So I'd again just practice moving your eyes and giving yourself some more eye movement, and see whether that helps you access the information. And again, if you work with a practitioner or like myself or a facilitator who can observe what you're doing, and we ask you a question like, where does that come from? The likelihood over time we'll spot a pattern that when you're remembering something you've actually done before, you might look in a particular direction. When you're recalling something from your imagination and you're making it up and it's more creative, you may look in a different direction again. And what I know is that when I'm remembering something from a natural experience that's happened, I tend to look up to the right. So if I want to remember something like a new behavior or what my goal is or what I'm working towards, I will put them up on vision boards above me. So another thing that you can do when it comes to planning, and one of the things I see people struggling with, is that they're often, they might buy a planner or they might be doing it on their electronic diaries, but we often need a combination of resources in order to access the information. And so in the attempt to save time, sometimes people are trying to keep it all in one place and keeping it there. But you may well want to write down on a piece of paper the thing that you'd like to have happen, and then ask, where does that need to be? Because your system will know. And it might be that it needs to be right in front of you, slightly up. It might need to be on the ceiling and you might be laying on the floor looking at it. You might want it. I've had one lady hold it on her chest, and so I could see it, but she couldn't. But that's where it needed to be, really close to her. Other times it might be on a wall or fridge door. It could be anywhere. But if your system does know where you need it to be. And so getting away from laptops and getting away from things where you're looking down all the time, and actually asking your system, asking yourself where it needs to be, you can place these pieces of paper with the outcome on in a different space. And you can ask questions like, what do I know here about that? And then you might say, well, find another space that knows something else about that. And you go somewhere else. And when you're in that new space, you might look back at that picture or that piece of paper, whatever's written on it, and notice what you know from there. And every time you move through space, you're physically taking yourself in a different space, but you're also going to be moving your eyes, which is definitely part of our ability to recall information and remember things. And given all that, depending on your own neurodiversity, depending on any trauma that's going on in your life, how stressed you are, working with a coach means that you actually get somebody who is going to track what you're saying, where you're saying it, how you're saying it, what spaces work for you, what spaces don't work for you, so that over time you learn how to set yourself up for success when it comes to planning. So I'm going to leave you there with that. So I want you to think about where do you need to be to plan at your best? How do you need to be? And what resource and support might you need? And my invitation is have colourful pens around you, maybe have Post-it notes, have different sizes paper, because maybe you're trying to write like a 100-year plan on a piece of A4 paper, but what you actually need is one of those rolls of wallpaper. So be curious about what size paper you might need. It's one of the reasons when people come to the Clarity retreats here in Hampshire, is that we do have one of those big rolls. We have big A1 pieces of paper. We have the flip chart paper. We've got grids on one side, plain on the other side. We have A1, we have A4, we have lined, we have plain, we have colored paper, because your system does know what you need. And it's really about asking you to train yourself to listen to and find out what you need. So given all that, there's been a couple of you on live today. So thank you for joining me. I want to invite you now to think about the 3 questions we do on a Monday for setup. Is, given what you've heard today about planning, what would you like to have happen? And if it's something you feel able to share with me, please do. If you have found this useful, sometimes a lot of the questions I ask you are quite personal and you want to do a bit of personal reflection. You don't want to make it public, but what I'd really, really appreciate is a like or a comment, because you know how the social media algorithms work. Is if you like it, you comment on, you share it, they tells the system that I'm saying something that's useful. Of course, if I'm not saying anything useful, then please give me that feedback too and tell me what you'd like to hear instead, because I'm sure that I can produce those videos accordingly. But please like and love that. Who's just given me the love? Thank you very much. So think about, what would you like to have happen? And then think about, how do you need to be for that to happen? And particularly thinking about confidence with planning and with what you've heard today. How do you need to be? And what kind of resource or support might you need for you to be like that and for that to happen? As always, if you are looking for resource and support and you're not sure where to get it, then I'm Cheryl Andrews, I'm the Listening Detective, and I love helping you work out what kind of listening you need. And sometimes all you need is some time and space to learn how to listen to yourself, to learn how to self-coach. And I've got a number of free resources that I'd love to point you in the direction of if you just want to chat through what we've got on site, on this website, and what you can access. Sometimes you do need somebody there holding that space so you don't feel so alone, don't feel so overwhelmed with all the information that's in your head, and helping you to get it out, unpack it, organize it, and put back in with the things you want to do and ditch the stuff that isn't useful to you. And so please, whether it's me or not, I'm really happy to listen to you and help you work out what kind of listener you need, whether it's a counselor or a therapist or a coach. And if it's not me, then I may well be able to direct you in the right direction to somebody who could help you with the kind of listening you need to do the planning that you want. Thank you so much for joining me today. Loretta's put, always useful. Thank you so much for your kind words, Loretta. I do appreciate that you're here with me most Mondays, keeping me company. Have an amazing week, everybody. Next week, we're back and we're going to be talking about time. And I do take a very different perspective on time. Most people call it time management, but reality is time is the same for everybody. How we feel about time, though, I'm sure you know, is very different. So we're going to be talking about time monsters, time profiles, and our relationship with time next week, and how that might impact our decision making and our planning. Have fun. I'll speak to you all soon. Have a brilliant week, and I'll see you next week.